Mhm. we'll start with the Mangala. ओम अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकाय चक्षुरुन्मीलितमेन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदामयं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरुं श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सागना रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सागरा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपीश गोपिका कान्ता राधा कान्ता नमस्ते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Hare Krishna. We'll continue with the last part of chapter 1 from the small book titled Beyond Birth and Death. So last week we stopped at this point uh, where Srila Prabhupada has given a very interesting analogy about how, due to identification with lots of material designations, those who are in the diseased condition, meaning the material disease, so such people will never find spiritual life to be uh, enjoyable. So here, Prabhupada has given the analogy of how a jaundice patient will uh, ex will experience sugar candy to be bitter because of his illness. The patient will not be able to experience the sweetness of sugar candy, but only a healthy person can taste its sweetness. So similarly, the conditioned souls who are in the disease condition due to the aggravation of the material disease, conditioned souls are not able to appreciate the beauty of spiritual life, and therefore they continue to get entangled in the material existence. So it is the disease condition which stops the conditioned souls from experiencing the sweetness of spiritual life. So as long as um, those diseased souls are not able to um, uh, acknowledge their malady, then they'll keep being entangled in the material existence, and there's no hope for liberation, because uh, especially those who get more and more materially entangled from the even after getting the human form of life. So uh, for such souls, uh, there's they are only going to be experiencing degradation from uh, the exalted position of the human form of life. Actually, material enjoyment is not enjoyment at all. Real enjoyment does not cease. In the Mahabharata, there's a verse, Ramante Yogino Anante, to the effect that the yogis, yogino, those who are endeavoring to elevate themselves to the spiritual platform, are actually enjoying Ramante, but their enjoyment is Anante, endless, or unlimited. This is because their enjoyment is in relation to the supreme enjoyer, Rama, Sri Krishna. The name Rama itself means the reservoir of pleasure. So it is only possible to find unlimited pleasure in the reservoir of pleasure in the service towards Sri Rama. Bhagavan Sri Krishna is the real enjoyer, and the Bhagavad Gita 5.9 confirms this. Bhoktaram yajna tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam nyatma maman shantim richati. The sages, and austerities. Bhoktaram yajna tapasam, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, sarvaloka maheshwaram, the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, suridam sarvabhutanam, attain peace from the pangs of material miseries. Nyatma amam shantim richati. Only those who understand these three aspects about the Supreme Lord can attain peace. About the flickering nature of material pleasure, Lord Krishna has also spoken in this verse in 5.22. Ye samspalja boga dukkayone evate adi antavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate buddha. An intelligent contact with the material senses. O son of Kuti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. Material sense pleasures are due to contact of the material senses, which are all temporary, because the body itself is temporary. So the material senses, which are part of the material body, they are also material, and the sense object of the sense objects after which the material senses are running. So those sense objects are also nothing but date matter. Again, they are all part of this temporary material world. A liberated soul is not interested in anything which is temporary. Knowing well the joys of transcendental pleasures, how can a liberated soul agree to enjoy false pleasure? So a liberated soul is the one who has realized that he is not the material body, but the spirit soul. So it is impossible for the eternal spirit soul to derive uh, eternal pleasure from the temporary material senses and sense objects. Satyanandi Chit Atmani Iti Rama Padena Shau Param Brahma Vidiyate. The mystics derive unlimited transcendental pleasures from the absolute truth, and therefore the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, is also known as Rama. In Srimad Bhagavatam, also 5.551, it is said, Nayam deho deha vajam nuloke kastan kaman arate vid bujam ye tapo divyam putraka yena sattvam suddhayet yasmat brahma shaukyam tu anantam. My dear sons, there is no reason to labor very hard for sense pleasure while in this human form of life. Such pleasures are available to the stool eaters. Or rather, you should undergo penances in this life by which your existence will be transcendental bliss. So even after getting the life, those who merely choose to go after material sense pleasures are no different from the stool eating hogs or the animals generally. So the main, the distinguishing characteristic between animals and human beings is that human beings have been bestowed with the ability to engage in spiritual inquiry, which should culminate in devotional service. So for those who willingly choose to act as animals, even after being blessed with the human form of life, so uh, they can never attain eternal bliss. They can never attain eternal pleasure. Rather, they'll only be stuck in the material entanglement and keep suffering through the degradation of the soul. Therefore, those who are true yogis or learned transcendentalists are not attracted by sense pleasures, which are the causes of continuous material existence. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he is entrapped by material miseries. So, this human form of life is the perfect opportunity for us to liberate ourselves from the material miseries simply by following the instructions of our acharyas. What Lord Krishna himself says in the Gita, uh, he starts to convey the transcendental teachings of the Gita from 2.11, but in 18.63, he tells Arjuna, Yata ichasi tata kuru. So the transcendental knowledge is available to everyone, and uh, it is entirely up to the individuals whether they want to continue uh, to be trapped in the material entanglement or whether they want to liberate themselves. Bhagavan Sri Krishna is the real enjoyer, and the Bhagavad Gita confirms this. 5.29. So, as mentioned earlier, the three important aspects about Krishna. Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities. So, regarding this, also, Lord Krishna explains further in chapters like uh, chapter 7, where he talks about how the demigods themselves are also empowered by him, and even those who are engaged in demigod worship, even when they attain their whatever material benedictions, uh, even that is possible only due to the sanction of Lord Krishna. And he is also the supreme controller of all planets and demigods, the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities. He is the supreme well-wisher. So those who understand these aspects about Lord Krishna, they can attain peace. Bhoga means enjoyment, and our enjoyment comes from understanding our position as the enjoyed. The real enjoyer is the Supreme Lord, and we are enjoyed by Him. So this is exactly why it is uh, it is foolish for conditioned souls to seek enjoyment through material sense gratification, simply because our original constitutional position is uh, never meant to enable us to be enjoyers. An example of this relationship can be found in the material world between the husband and the wife. The husband is the enjoyer, Purusha, and the wife is enjoyed, Prakriti. The word Pri means woman. Purusha or spirit is the subject, and Prakriti or nature is the object. The enjoyment, however, is participated in both by the husband and the wife. When actual enjoyment is there, there's no distinction that the husband is enjoying more or the wife is enjoying less. Although the male is the predominator and the female is the predominated, there is no division when it comes to enjoyment. On a larger scale, no living entity is the enjoyer. So regarding this, also in Gita chapter 13, there is the explanation regarding Prakriti Purusha, and also in the intro chapter, in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada has also given the explanation regarding uh, the real meaning of Prakriti. Prakriti is it is not limited to uh, the conception of material nature. Rather, Prakriti also involves the jivas. So it has been explained by Srila Prabhupada in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita. So in this part, what is material nature? That is also explained in Gita as inferior Prakriti or inferior nature. the living entity is explained as the superior Prakriti. So Prakriti is always under control, whether inferior or superior. So material nature is uh, it's not that only material nature is Prakriti. The living entities, the jivas, are also regarded as Prakriti, but the jivas are regarded as superior Prakriti, and the material nature is the inferior Prakriti. But both the Jiva Brahma and Mad Brahma, the material nature is regarded as Mad Brahma, and the living entities are regarded as Jiva Brahma. So both belong to the category of Prakriti, and therefore both are always subordinate, predominated by the Lord, who is the predominator. The living entities and material nature are both predominated, controlled by the Supreme Lord. According to Gita, the living entities, although parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, are to be considered Prakriti. This is clearly mentioned in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Aparayam Itastanyam, Prakritim Viddhime Param Jiva Bhutam. This material nature is my inferior Prakriti, but beyond this is another Prakriti, Jiva Bhutam, the living entities. So the living entities are also regarded as Prakriti, but uh, they belong to the superior Prakriti because of the superior quality of having consciousness. Unlike the material nature, which consists of nothing but dead matter, the material nature is inferior Prakriti because it uh, it is devoid of consciousness. Uh, Contrary to that, the living entities have consciousness, and therefore they are regarded as superior Prakriti. But both the inferior and superior Prakriti are still meant to be the enjoyed. Uh, Both the inferior Prakriti and superior Prakriti are meant to be enjoyed by the Purusha, that is the Supreme Lord. So it is just not our constitutional position to be enjoyers. Though due to our deluded condition, we are thinking that we can be enjoyers, but it is simply not our constitutional position. Uh, and it has been aggravated further due to our embodied condition. So the spirit soul is never meant to be an enjoyer. So um, it is so our attempts to enjoy through material sense gratification will only result in uh, frustration and endless suffering. On a large scale, no living entity is the enjoyer. God expanded into many, and we constitute those expansions. God is one without a second, but he willed to become many in order to enjoy. We have experienced that there is little or no enjoyment in sitting alone in a room talking to oneself. However, if there are 5 people present, our enjoyment is enhanced. And if we can discuss Krishna before many people, the enjoyment is all the greater. Enjoyment means variety. God became many for his enjoyment, and thus our position is that of the enjoyed. That is our constitutional position and the purpose for our creation. So the purpose for our creation, our constitutional position, is to be enjoyed by the supreme enjoyer. Therefore, if we are thinking that we can also become enjoyers just because we have consciousness, if we think that we can, our individual consciousness is equivalent to the supreme consciousness, so that is nothing but foolishness, and that delusion will only result in further material entanglement. God became many for his enjoyment, and thus our position is that of the enjoyed. That is our constitutional position. Both enjoyer and enjoyed have consciousness, but the consciousness of the enjoyed is subordinate to the consciousness of the enjoyer. Although Krishna is the enjoyer and we the enjoyed, the enjoyment can be participated in equally by everyone. Our enjoyment can be perfected when we participate in the enjoyment of God. There is no possibility of our enjoying separately on the bodily platform. Material enjoyment on the gross bodily platform is discouraged throughout the Bhagavad Gita. This is simply because, again, our constitutional position is that we are not the material body, and therefore we can never, the spirit soul can never derive uh, uh, real pleasure from material enjoyment. Similarly, being part and parcel of the supreme enjoyer, uh, we as eternal fragmental parts and parcels of the supreme enjoyer, we can only experience true satisfaction and true pleasure when the complete whole is satisfied. So as long as we do not work towards satisfying uh, the the true origin, meaning as the Supreme Lord himself says that we are his eternal fragmental parts, as long as he is not satisfied, as long as we are obsessed with satisfying ourselves individually, it will only result in our frustration because uh, our constitutional position is meant to serve the Supreme Lord, because it is only due to his will that uh, we have been created as his expansions, and therefore only by understanding that um, satisfying the Supreme Lord is the ultimate perfection of life, only that could result in our success in this human form of life. So this has also been highlighted by Srila Prabhupada in the preface section itself of the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Mm. So in this part, especially from the preface section, Srila Prabhupada has mentioned that instead of satisfying his own personal material senses, he has to satisfy the senses of the Lord. That is the highest perfection of life. So beyond understanding that we endeavor to inquire further about the origin of this spirit soul. Then uh, the Supreme Lord uh, has already mentioned that uh, the individual spirit souls are all eternal fragmental parts of himself. So the parts will only be satisfied when the complete whole is satisfied. And therefore that is why um, working for the satisfaction of the complete whole is regarded as the highest perfection of life. And particularly for the conditioned souls who have been blessed with the human form of life can only attain that highest perfection of life when uh, we uh, truly realize our position in this material world and surrender to the Supreme Lord and engage in devotional service. 2.14 Mantra Sparshas Kaunteya, Sidoshna Sugulkuta, Agama Paino Anityas, Tam Titik O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of heat and cold, happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O son of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So it is only due to the material sense perception that we are experiencing all these various dualities, which constantly become which constantly prove to be a source of distress. So as long as we are materially entangled in this material world, in search of material sense pleasures, we will attain nothing but misery, because this material world is full of dualities. And as long as we are trapped by these dualities, as long as we are subject to these dualities, we can never attain eternal bliss. So we may be experiencing happiness for some time, then distress is sure to follow. Similarly, when there is distress for a while, then happiness will follow for a limited period of time, and the cycle continues. So it is only by being liberated from the domination of the three modes of material nature, and also by transcending all these dualities, only then we can attain peace and uh, realize our true self. Even in Gita 2.45, it is one of the earliest verses in which Lord Krishna talks about the three modes of material nature. As we know, there is one separate chapter dedicated to the three modes of material nature in chapter 14 of the Gita. But chapter 2 of the Gita is regarded as the executive summary of the entire Gita, and chapter 18 is the conclusive summary, which is spoken towards the end. So even in chapter 2 itself, like in 2.45, Lord Krishna says, Traigunya Vishya Veda, Nisraigunya Bhavarjuna, Nirdunda Nitya Sattvasto, Niryoga Shema Atmaman. In that verse, Lord Krishna says, the subject matters of the Vedas, especially the Karma Kanda portions, they deal with activities related to the three modes of material nature. So all the three modes are binding. So they are not liberating. Even the mode of goodness, though it is purer than the other two modes of passion and ignorance, still even the mode of goodness is binding, and therefore even a person who is situated truly in the mode of goodness, even if the person performs the fruitive activities prescribed in the Karma Kanda portions of the Vedas, at most he will only be blessed with the opportunity to be elevated to the heavenly planets, and he will be able to enjoy until his accumulated piety expires, and then he still has to return to the middle earth planet. So even by being elevated to the heavenly planets, still the person will still be trapped in the same material universe. So as long as we remain in the material universe, we are always going to be subject to dualities, and therefore in Gita verse 2.45, Lord Krishna also says, Nirdvanda Nitya Satasto. Once we are situated in the Nirdvanda position, meaning being free from dualities, and also in the position where we have transcended the modes, then we can be free from all the material miseries. The same thing is also spoken in Gita 15.5, in the 5th verse of chapter 15. In that verse, Lord Krishna says, Dvandve Vimukta, those who are liberated from the dualities, those who are detached from the dualities, they can become qualified to attain the spiritual world. So as long as we are obsessed with material sense gratification, we have to experience the dualities, meaning no matter how much happiness we experience, distress is sure to follow. So similarly, there will always be success, failure, profit, loss. So this due to the influence of dualities in the material world, we can never attain eternal bliss. The gross material body is a result of the interaction of the material modes of nature, and it is doomed to destruction. 2.18 Antavanta imedeha nityashokta sharirina anasino aprameyasya tasmat yujasva bharata. Only the material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and the eternal living entity is subject to destruction. Therefore fight, O descendant of Bharata. So this verse is still in the earliest part of the teachings of the Gita, which refers to the distinction between the eternal spirit soul and the temporary material body. 2.18. So when the gross material body is so vulnerable to destruction, and it is actually subservient to the eternal spirit soul, there's no way for the eternal spirit soul to derive satisfaction from the material senses and the material sense objects. So even in the earlier session of this chapter, for this small book, Beyond Birth and Death, we have also a chariot metaphor from Katha Upanishad. So in that chariot metaphor, it describes the hierarchy of the soul, intelligence, mind, uh, and material senses, which can be compared to the chariot. The passenger of the chariot is the spirit soul. The charioteer or chariot driver is the intelligence. The reins that are being held by the chariot driver, they can be compared to the mind, and the horses are compared to the material senses. So when the horses are not controlled by the reins, then the horses or material senses will be running after the sense objects. So ideally, the control should be top down from the passenger of the chariot, that is the spirit soul. That spirit soul should be able to control intelligence, mind, and the material senses. But in the case of the conditioned souls who are obsessed with material sense gratification, the control is happening bottom up in the exact reverse direction, because uh, the horses or the material senses are running wildly behind sense objects, and the mind is also being influenced by the mind, which is represented by the reins, are being pulled by the wild horses, the wild material senses, and therefore intelligence, the chariot driver, is degraded, and as a result, the spirit soul, the passenger of the chariot, is gets led to total destruction. So the completely vulnerable and temporary material body can never provide satisfaction and eternal pleasure to the eternal spirit soul. And therefore, the control should be from top down, from the spirit. The spirit soul should take control of all the other lower elements. But in the case of the deluded uh, conditioned souls, it is the exact opposite. Sri Krishna therefore encourages us to transcend the bodily conception of existence and attain to our actual spiritual life. 14.20. Gunanetan atitya trin dehi deha samudbhavan janma mrityu jara dukhe vimukto amrutamashnute. So this is from chapter 14 regarding the three modes of material nature. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, he can become free from birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and can enjoy nectar even in this life. So 14.20, the purport, how one can stay in the transcendental position even in this body in full Krishna consciousness, is explained in this verse. In verse 14.20, the Sanskrit word dehi means embodied. Although one is within this material body, by his advancement in spiritual knowledge, he can be free from the influence of the modes of nature. He can enjoy the happiness of spiritual life even in this body, because after leaving this body, he is certainly going to the spiritual sky. But even in this body, he can enjoy spiritual happiness. In other words, Devotional service in Krishna consciousness is a sign of liberation from material entanglement, and this will be explained in the 18th chapter. When one is freed from the influence of the modes of material nature, he enters into devotional service. So in Gita 14.20, Lord Krishna talks about how uh, transcending the modes is the solution towards uh, liberating oneself from the material miseries. So this is from verse 14.20. Of course, in 14.26, the Supreme Lord gives the exact formula to become uh, to trans to actually transcend the three modes. First, if we look at the entire portion, like up to the 20 verses, they are descriptions about the three modes. But starting from verse 19 onwards, the Supreme Lord talks about why it is important to transcend the three modes. Because as the Supreme Lord mentions in the 10th verse of chapter 14, uh, there's always the constant competition between the three puppeteers, between the three modes of material nature. So even for a person who may be completely situated in the mode of goodness, even that person is not safe, because the modes of passion and ignorance will always be targeting that person, and there's always the risk of fall down from the position of goodness, and only it is important to transcend even the mode of goodness itself towards the mode of Shuddha Sattva or pure goodness. So only that transcendental position can ensure freedom from birth, death, old age, and their distresses. So this has been also highlighted by the Supreme Lord in verse 20, and in verse 26 of chapter 14, he specifically he specifically explains about how one can transcend the modes. So first he says that it is important to um, transcend the modes, and he also explains about how one can transcend the modes simply by engaging in Bhakti Yoga. Because in verse 26 of chapter 14, the Supreme Lord says, Mamchayo avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samati jaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. So the Supreme Lord specifically mentions bhakti yogena sevate, not any other yoga system. It is Bhakti Yoga specifically, meaning only devotional service can ensure that a person gets to transcend the three modes. To establish ourselves on the pure Brahmabhuta spiritual platform above the three modes, we must take up the method of Krishna consciousness, the gift of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the chanting of the names of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, facilitates this process, especially in this Kali Yuga. This method is called Bhakti Yoga or Mantra Yoga, and it is employed by the highest transcendentalists. How the transcendentalists realize their identity beyond birth and death, beyond the material body, and transfer themselves from the material universe to the spiritual universes are the subjects of the following chapters. So, even if you look at the entire discourse of the Bhagavatam at Naimisharanya, where the sages headed by Shaunaka Rishi, they are discussing about how to uh, about the ways by which the fallen Kali Jivas can attain perfection in Kali Yuga. So it starts with that scene, and when Sutta Goswami enters the scene, then he starts to impart the knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam as he heard it during the discourse between Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadev Goswami. So even after the entire discourse of the Bhagavatam, the last verse of the Bhagavatam uh, in the 12th canto, it ends with this shloka. Nama Sankirtanam Yasya Sarva Papa Pranashanam Pranamo Dukkha Shamanas Tam Namami Harim Param. So the 18,000 verses spoken throughout the Bhagavatam is concluded by this one verse, which glorifies the uh, holy name of Hari as the uh, um, remedy for the fallen souls of Kali Yuga, as the destroyer of all distress. So, Lord Krishna has given the formula for transcending the three modes through Bhakti Yoga, and even the Bhagavatam establishes chanting of the holy name as the topmost practice of Bhakti Yoga. So that's all for today. We have completed the first chapter of this small book, Beyond Birth and Death. So in the upcoming session, we start with chapter 2. Thank you. Any questions or